Welcome to RiskIQ Radio.
Okay, so welcome into RiskIQ Radio. This is Jack Russo. I've been lucky enough to be associated with RiskIQ from the beginning. And this year, starting in January 2020, we finally got to the point of creating a radio room inside the corporate headquarters of RiskIQ. And we're lucky enough to have someone who is going to help explain a lot of the complexity of what RiskIQ does. And the radio room is now functional, and hopefully we can keep that way. So, Brandon, tell us a little bit about your journey, because you've been with RiskIQ for a long time, not as long as I've been associated with, but you're an old-timer here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I grew up in Baltimore on the East Coast. Obviously, RiskIQ is on the West Coast, so a little bit of a difference there. But grew up and attended an art magnet school and split my time between there and doing a technology school. So I was lucky that I got exposed to networking very early on from Cisco.
Right.
So Cisco had seeded a number of high school classes.
Nice.
And were essentially getting kids certified on their technology.
Okay.
And one of the allures to working with Cisco technology for me was someone essentially demoed sharing a file between two systems, so
Right.
two networked computers.
Right.
And once I saw that, I was like, wow.
You were sold.
Yeah, I was like, this is crazy that
Right.
like this digital file
Right.
moved from one place to the next. And,
Yes.
And it was really interesting to learn all of the networking in that environment. And
At a young age.
yeah.
At a really young age.
14 years old.
I mean, when I was 14 back in Brooklyn, because I'm from the East Coast as well, and computers back then were mainframe computers.
Right.
And you used punch cards.
Yep.
Now, I'm really dating myself, but people know that I've been around for a while. I became a lawyer after being a computer programmer on mainframe computers, and punch cards then eventually went to terminals, and that was like a big deal that you could actually timeshare into a mainframe without using paper punch cards.
Yeah.
So we've come a long way.
Oh, yeah,
and
absolutely.
even the educational part is completely different, because you've never punched into a punch card machine.
Nope.
That's like, what? Cards in some sort of order that represented the computer program itself? That's unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, we read about it, but in class, it was most of what we had was pretty modern. And I think at the time we were incredibly lucky because it was sort of the rise of security. And so we had guest lecturers come in from either the local community colleges or the local DEF CON groups.
Right.
And they sort of educated us to the fact that security was going to be a huge deal and that networking was the gateway into getting into that.
It's a really big point. It's a good place to start, because if you think back to the day of the mainframe, the security was mostly physical security for the mainframe
Right.
in the classroom.
Right.
So it was not about, we have to worry about something called an attack surface.
Yeah.
That was not the way people thought. They thought physical security.
Sure.
Physical security is like a trivial aspect of security now. It's important. But now the world is completely digital.
Yeah.
And it's all about this intangible security of what's going on, quote, in the cyberspace world, in this fiction that we describe as the internet, which it's hard to sort of get your arms around.
It's amorphous.
It's very amorphous. It's very much a construct of what network is tied to what network, that's creating this seamless way for people to do so many things
Right.
in so many different ways. And you were educated at the time that was essentially starting to occur. And I was educated at a time where that had not even been invented yet.
Yeah, it's completely different. And now, I mean, even thinking about just how it's evolved over time, it doesn't feel vastly different other than the fact that it's so ingrained into our lives.
Yes.
Where at the time of being in high school, learning about these networking protocols and how packets and switches and routers all make the internet go around.
Right.
It's the fundamentals are still there.
Yes.
The DNS servers that we're using, the protocols for routing are still largely
Right.
the same. The technology has obviously gotten better and cheaper.
Right.
But the core basics of the internet haven't really evolved too much. But the security itself has, only because by virtue of that connectedness with the internet,
Yes.
more people have adopted it in their business
Yes.
world. And
The numbers are now huge.
it's staggering.
Most people, even my grandkids who are now like basically second and fourth graders have email addresses,
It's crazy.
and they expect to communicate by email. There is no such thing as a greeting card in paper anymore.
Yeah, I guess, well, if I really truly think about this, my daughter, who's 13 months, has an email address as well for global entry and Homeland Security.
Right.
Right? We need a way to establish her identity.
Right.
And we thought, okay, well, let's go register an email
It
address.
seems like the very first thing after you're born will be not only a birth certificate, but also a social security number and an email address and
Right.
maybe a global entry passport kind of thing.
Yeah, identity is going to be, it's a space that continues to evolve. I think it's ripe for disruption. And it wouldn't shock me at all if all of a sudden governments got into the practice of having digital identities and making sure that those scaled out effectively.
Right. So in high school, you become passionate about computers and networking.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that take you? I'm going to go to a technical college, or I'm going to do something special, or where does that take you?
For me, growing up, how I did, the whole thought of college wasn't something that was like top of mind. It was
Okay.
working. So I worked full time while going to high school. Or I didn't work full time all the time, but I
Right.
definitely had a job after school, and I had
Right.
to kind of sort of fend for myself. My mom was trying the best that she could. But for me, there was passion in networking. There was passion in building websites. There was
Right.
passion in learning about security and how that was evolving, and that was interesting. So for me, I wasn't necessarily looking at college. In fact, I kind of goofed off in this high school class. I didn't really realize how much of an opportunity was being given to me, and a lot of my peers didn't realize this either. But one of my friends got recruited by the NSA
Nice.
while in high school, and he was supporting them half the time. So the school that we went to allowed the kids, once they got past, I think, senior year, that you could do a work-study program. So
For the NSA.
yeah. So he'd
Okay.
leave and go do that, and I was kind of
Okay.
jealous of it. And for me, one of the side benefits of this class, not only learning networking and about computers, was also the fact that even though I didn't know what I wanted to do at the time, I was passionate about computers, but I wasn't sure how that manifested into a career.
Right.
The program actually gave me not only a path to get Cisco certified,
Right.
but also gave me 19 or 21 credits that I could apply to a college
Oh,
institution.
nice. Nice.
And for me, one of the teachers that came in and informed us about security happened to be a professor who ran the security program over at one of the community colleges.
Okay.
And I was not able to easily get any grants or funding because my mom worked and I worked.
Okay.
So despite us being we weren't poor by any stretch of the means, but
Right.
we were kind of getting by.
Right.
We couldn't just dump the money into college. And
Right.
so for me, community college seemed like the most logical
Right.
route. And I started taking classes at night.
So you were actually ahead of your time, because people are saying today
Yeah.
that foregoing four-year colleges in favor of something that is shorter, more focused, and more directed at where your passion is the future of education.
Yeah, it was interesting. So it was 11th grade, I started taking night classes.
Okay.
Because I had some free time to do that, and we were encouraged. Even if we weren't going to stay in computer and technology, our teacher was one of the best teachers that we had. Later ran the Cisco program for the East Coast. She would encourage us to go take classes, and so we started taking night classes. A couple of friends and I, with Red Hat and learning about Linux,
Right.
and further networking and building websites.
Right.
And it was at that point that when I eventually graduated, it wasn't really a question as to whether or not I would go to community college or college at all. It was obvious.
Right.
I was paying for it out of pocket at night.
Yes. Yes.
And I had racked up. I had 1 year's worth of college by the time I graduated. I was halfway to an associate's degree.
Nice.
And so I looked at the program and I said, man, I could just spend another year and become a network,
certified network.
Well, I could get the Cisco certification, but I could also get an associate's degree in network technology.
Right.
And I wanted to desperately get out of the area I was living in.
Right.
And at 19 years old, I kind of moved out and, decided I was going to live my own life without.
Did you stay on the East Coast, or where'd you go from there?
I stayed on the East Coast, just got out of the area around Baltimore, went to Ellicott City over in Howard County.
Okay.
Was racing bikes at the time.
Oh, motorcycles.
No, cyclo.
Bicycles.
Just bicycles.
Oh,
yeah.
bicycles. Okay.
Yeah, so Howard County had some of the most favorable terrain for bikes, and they were
Right.
also the friendliest county.
Nice.
But moved out there and, was supporting myself, and I wanted to have a way to market myself, and I thought getting that associate's degree would allow me to get past this catch-22 situation of, sorry, we can't hire you because you don't have enough experience.
Yes.
But I couldn't get the experience without,
Right.
getting hired.
Right. But you got very deeply involved in stuff that became hugely valuable.
Yeah, I got
'Cause
lucky.
you were ahead of the curve. You were sort of ahead of the curve here.
Yeah, but I think it's funny because I think you see a lot of people who are successful and people look at them and they say, man, wow, you just worked so much harder than I did and you just did everything right, and what am I doing? And I think it's a product of circumstance a
Right.
lot of the times.
Right.
That it happened to be good timing during high school that we
Yes.
got exposure.
Yes.
It happened to be that we were within, 30 miles of the NSA.
Yes.
They would recruit people.
Yes.
That at the time they were seeing this new talent come out of these programs and wanting to invest in them.
Right.
And for me, I got lucky that I was encouraged to go into community college, and by circumstance, again, like if I had a lot of money, I probably would have traveled out of state. But because I didn't, and I had to sort of figure it out on my own and pay for it and have a full-time job,
Right.
I had to make ends meet, and I did the community college route. And it just so happens that I met people who were very passionate educators who saw something in me and they wanted me to be successful, and they allowed that to happen. And that meant, writing waivers for me to skip classes or to overload on credits, and to customize my schedule. And they put their neck out on the line to support me. And as a result, I felt more like I had to do good by them.
So what did you remember as your first personal computer? Just to take you back, what do you remember having? Because I can remember I went from mainframe computers to mini computers, and then from mini computers, the very first personal computer was this homemade, homebrew kind of Altai machine that you put a paper tape into. And yeah, I mean, this goes way back.
Right.
And then the first keyboard-based computer was something by Commodore, which was a company way back when. And then probably the first machine that I can remember that was sort of, a more modern machine was a luggable compact machine that looked like a suitcase.
Yeah.
That's MS-DOS, actually CPM, if you really go back even before MS-DOS.
Yeah.
So you're way younger than me, so you're way more advanced on the curve, just to create the contrast, which is, what do you remember as your very first machine?
IBM machine, I don't recall the model, and I just remember it was Windows 95. Windows 95, and then it went to Windows 98. And it was the era of AOL exploding. The CDs were everywhere.
Right,
That
exactly.
marketing campaign was genius.
Right.
And the biggest allure for getting online at the time with your 56K modem was to get the You've Got Mail, which was obviously exciting, and to get on AOL chat and join the chat rooms and find people.
Just as a footnote, we presented last month a patent case, and to take the judge and jury back to where technology was in the 90s, we played the audio of
That's my favorite.
the modem.
Yeah.
And people were like, wow, I haven't heard that in decades.
It's a throwback.
This idea that you dialed up
Yeah.
to make a modem connection with that sound. And then the You've Got Mail,
Yep.
the AOL sound.
Such
Because
a good
patents
feeling.
last so long, and oftentimes you have to go back 20 years. I mean, there's a footnote to the story, but a lot of technology builds on technology, which builds on technology, which builds on technology. And inevitably, this represents the risks that RiskIQ addresses which is where are the gaps, where are the holes, where are the back doors, where are the things that are going to create problems, and how do you detect them?
Well, it's an evolution, right? Like where I think the internet sort of came to be, and it entered, the homes of people that were fortunate enough to have a computer, and then it entered libraries where it became more accessible, and then it became cheaper, and then now it's introduced in a form factor with our phones where we're able to carry it around. The infrastructure's just gotten better and better. So to your point,
right,
it kind of builds on top of itself. And I think the area that RiskIQ services is companies don't just move over to the internet overnight. And in fact, even when they begin to move over to the internet, or they've been moving to the internet, maybe even for the past decade, there's still processes that exist with people.
Yes.
And so that iterative process has them kind of getting on the internet just piecemeal.
Yes.
New servers need to be brought online. More demand needs to get fulfilled. They want to introduce new product lines, new services. All of that requires an increasingly larger digital presence. And so the market that we tend to service is obviously customers that are adopting the internet and they're doing business online. And it's just a matter of the scalability. It's hard to keep up.
I mean, everyone in modern business these days has some digital presence.
That's what I like to think.
Right?
I say the same thing.
I mean, it's like if you don't have it, people don't think you exist.
Right.
My wife said recently she was doing some research on some companies that I had invested in, and it wasn't clear whether the company was still in business. Right. So she says, well, let me do a bunch of searches and see if their website is still up. Yeah. Because if the website is not up, that's probably a pretty good sign that something's wrong. Right. It's a little bit like the store closed kind of thing. The phone number doesn't get answered. The phone number has been transferred. If they have a website, well, they might still be alive, although I guess there are some companies that keep their websites running even after the business is closed, which is
it can be hard to tell. I think one of the terms that we hear often is digital transformation.
Yes.
And, I think from a marketing perspective, it's a bit misleading because a lot of the materials I see personally say, like, we're helping you support your digital transformation efforts, or it's happening.
Yes.
It's been happening.
Yes.
It's going to continue to happen. I don't actually see a point where it stops.
Yes.
I don't necessarily believe there's going to be a point in time where every possible function of a business is completely automated and it doesn't warrant human interaction.
Right.
If we get to that state, that'll be really interesting.
People are trying to do it. You see these commercials. I mean, I'll just drop a footnote. I guess you could theoretically buy a car, probably can buy a company too, on the internet.
Right.
That was unheard of years ago. You had to go to a dealership. You had to negotiate.
We're getting closer.
It seemed like Carvana has some ads that they're running that say, just figure out the car you want, tell us what options, what color, we'll deliver it, or you can come pick it up in our coin-operated store, which is like hard to imagine that you could actually get a car without a human interaction. But I want to ask you, you're a very personable person. You can just pick up a hot mic and do this interview. We're not scripted. Just to tell everyone, we're here live, kind of doing this as a way to get the word across about what people need to know in terms of security, and we're going to cover lots of topics over the course of the next who knows how many hundreds of hours, maybe less. I mean, obviously we'll pull other people in, but conceptually, were you already thinking security as you were getting these credentials and studying on your own, or were you thinking, no, security, it's like an open web, man, everything should be shared, everything should be open? Because I think a lot of people want to believe that the web had some baked-in security, but it didn't. It was kind of a publishing system, if you think about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a product of the timing in which I got exposed to it. I think I've met plenty of people that were part of that era of like free and open exchange, the ability, like the mind-blowing aspect that you're speaking with someone from across the world, exchanging information with them.
Right.
For better or for worse, that never really occurred in my head how cool that was, or how amazing. It just didn't solidify. I don't know why. But what did was this allure that you could get into things that you weren't supposed to. And being exposed to this power, the phrase that my teacher taught us at the networking class was, with great power comes great responsibility. And we were routinely reminded of the fact that our ability to understand how networking operates, from the routers to the switches to programming them to how the packets flow to how they can be manipulated and constructed.
Right.
And that there was limited security mechanisms at the time, that we could spoof packets, that we could masquerade as someone else, that we could reroute things, that we could DDoS a switch or DDoS a router or take down a website.
Yes.
It was very much top of mind that we were getting exposure to how the internet functioned, but how also being reminded that we had a lot of power. We could take these things down.
So you had ethical duties implied by the ability to have this additional smarts and intelligence. It's a little bit like we're training you, but what comes with it is an ethical responsibility.
Yeah.
Like a medical doctor would say, I'm able to be your medical doctor, but what comes with it is the fiduciary duty or the ethical duty to keep your medical information confidential.
That's right.
Like implied, or the legal duty if you're a lawyer to keep the client information confidential.
That's right.
And I think I see a lot of old school people, many of which, I've known for decades, many of which have been clients for decades, say there's been a breakdown to some degree of that ethics, not within the community that RiskIQ operates in, but in the world at large.
Sure.
It's a little bit like if you don't have a lock on your door, then probably you're inviting a burglar. That was unheard of years ago.
Sure.
Years ago, at least in Brooklyn where I lived, in New York, it was okay not to lock your door. Your neighbors were like looking out for you.
Right. Sense of community.
Yeah, the sense of community, the sense of you just don't trespass without like having either knowing the person and having permission or implied permission, or calling or making sure it's okay. But now it's a little bit like, hey, if you don't have your door and your security door locked and your security system on and your video system running,
right,
that's your fault. I mean, that to me seems a little backwards in this.
It feels like a regression for sure. I hate to break it to you, though, despite those warnings and the ethics that I should have practiced. I was 16, and the route in Baltimore was, drugs, local neighborhood gangs, or get into trouble other ways.
And you chose the latter.
I chose to get into trouble other ways.
That's good. That's good.
I used my powers for mischievous actions, which included hacking in Baltimore City.
So you're a little bit like Steve Jobs figuring out how to make long-distance calls without charge.
I was not part of the freaking era.
Okay.
I was part of when Wi-Fi was taking off. And so the early days of WEP and the weak encryption standards, or no encryption standards. We were in networks all the time. We were trying to identify how to escalate privileges on Linux machines and get into them, brute forcing via SSH and FTP clients and dumping data.
Okay. So what I've done, and part of the reason for doing this series, is we're going to eventually allow new employees to watch these audios, listen to the audios, watch the videos. So I've been keeping a little list of what I call TLAs, three-letter acronyms. Mm-hmm. So some of them that you've reeled off, and I'll just ask you as best you can, and maybe we'll create a bibliography. Like when you use the three-letter acronym like FTP, remind me what that stands for.
File Transfer Protocol.
Right? And that was something which often, as I remember it, people would not secure with a password, and there would be a bunch of stuff up there, because I remember having a case 15, 20 years ago. It was a trade secret case in which one of the defenses we used was the particular company had put all their source code up on an unrestricted FTP site, and anyone could get access to it. And they were suing, saying that their source code was confidential. And the judge just looked at them saying, it can't be confidential if you put it up on an FTP site and it's got no security on it.
Yeah, the social norms don't apply there.
But you're saying, hey, if you're smart enough, you can figure out where these FTP sites are. And sometimes there's like no security on it.
Right.
And you can get everything.
And at the time, FTP and Telnet, some of these other protocols were, what we call in the clear. They weren't encrypted.
Yes.
And so being from a network background, we understood packets on the network. And once you were part of the network, you could see everything going across that network. And
right.
If you knew how to analyze those packets, then you could pull out, username and passwords, even if they were secure. So if somebody decided to put a username and password in that FTP session, if I'm sitting outside your house, sitting on your network, during working hours for your business, and you're conducting, using weak protocols that lack encryption,
Yes.
then there I am able to take that information.
So everyone knows Wi-Fi. That's a 4-letter acronym. WIFI.
I don't actually know what it stands for, though.
Well, it's sort of wireless. That's the WI.
Yep.
And FI is high fidelity.
Okay.
So like hi-fi, but Wi-Fi is wireless, high fidelity internet. And
There
they
you go.
collapsed it all together. But we're going to create a list like this. But DDoS is another one when you refer to a DDoS attack.
So distributed denial of service.
Right. So these things all play into, and we only have a few minutes for this session, but let's talk about this. It creates an attack surface for bad people to attack valuable resources, and corporations have their valuable resources available online, typically subject to some sort of security, but often not the greatest security.
Right.
Like if you think about it, I tell the story, my dad never had a credit card. He used to go rent a car, and they look at him saying, how are you going to pay for it? You don't have a credit card. He's like, cash.
Yeah.
We don't even take cash.
Wow.
He finally had to, like in his 80s, he died at 90, but basically in his 80s, he finally had to get a credit card. He said, I don't need a cell phone, I don't need a credit card, and I don't need to get hacked. He had like no attack surface.
Yeah.
He was like unknown. Now, he was in the Navy, he had a record, a positive discharge record.
Right.
You could trace him. Like I go to Ancestry.com and I find his records.
Right.
But they're all paper records.
Yeah.
There's nothing digital
No
about
digital
my
trail.
dad. My mom is a little more sophisticated. She's a little younger. She has had credit cards. She's had cell phones. She has a larger attack surface, probably not as large as my attack surface,
Right.
and certainly not as large as, say, my law firm's attack surface, and certainly not as large as, like, General Motors' attack surface, or one of your clients here for RiskIQ is Amazon, Disney, Facebook. Those are huge attack surfaces.
Correct.
So tell us about the problem that RiskIQ seeks to help to address, given how attack surfaces keep getting bigger and bigger.
Well, as we mentioned about digital transformation, it just continues that it's an iterative process that businesses continue to expand their offerings, the size of the company, and even ones that go away that may, to your point, still have a website that remains online even though they're not doing business.
Yes.
What RiskIQ is essentially solving for is the fact that as you stand up more services or you increase the number of employees, to your point, the attack surface grows.
Yes.
And in this age, this digital era where, everything's so hyper connected and connected in multiple different ways.
Yes.
Our phones are on the same network right now, and even if they're not on the same network, they're likely connected to the same tower.
Yes.
And so, like, from a proximity perspective, we're close to each other, and so we're in a way like overlapping in attack surfaces because someone could infer that we're together in this very moment using data.
Yes.
What RiskIQ is attempting to do is essentially understand the attack surface. So we want to make sure that the businesses that are operating online in this digital world understand what they actually have. So bringing a level of visibility that they may feel in some cases that they have, but it's not complete.
Yes.
We fill in that gap for them. So stage one is getting them a level of visibility because, the internet has allowed us to grow rapidly.
Yes.
And with that growth, doesn't always come with the proper due diligence on top of it, that we're doing everything right.
Right.
So we want to grow quickly. Security's not always top of mind.
Yes.
Very easy for a business to end up with 10,000 assets and not know where they're at.
Yes.
Beyond just having assets themselves, there's this notion of web applications and websites and having a web presence and selling products. Those could be in the digital form. And in order to make that possible, you need technologies. Mm-hmm. And those technologies, in a way, have an attack surface. That there's individual contributors or a company helping put that material out there. And by virtue of how all those things work together, that creates vulnerabilities in that attack surface.
Right.
And
so your whole supply chain of products and services are additional broader attack surfaces into your attack surface.
Yeah, everything's, by virtue of how the internet functions, everything's connected.
Yes.
And this is where it's helpful to have that networking background. The way that I think about businesses online is the fact that in order for us to do business, I have to ultimately route packets to you that you receive. Now, it's immensely abstracted away from a technology perspective. But at the end of the day, when we're operating online, it comes down to just a bunch of switches and routers routing packets.
Yes.
Right? And that's it. And so if I want to attack you, I'm going to send a bunch of packets that are specially crafted in order to try and get in.
Right.
That's all that it is that we're doing. And we need a way to one, gain visibility into that, manage that attack surface. And then as a business, like if I need to have 10,000 assets, I need to make sure that I understand what's running on all of them.
Right.
You know, if I have a bunch of vendors that I'm working with and there's an insecurity within them, if that vendor's compromised, do I have a contingency plan that does not allow the attacker to come into me?
Right.
You know, if my most valuable information is that of my customers or source code, as you've mentioned,
right.
You know, am I taking the proper protections to ensure that that's safe?
So for this segment, let's end with this question, which is RiskIQ, because I was there at the beginning, has been around now for more than 10 years.
Right.
You've been with RiskIQ for about
5
half
years
that
coming
journey,
in.
which is great because
Yeah.
you've got some institutional knowledge.
Right.
I've got a lot more, but you're a lot closer to the company than I am because I'm just an outside board member now, although I was sort of an insider for a while. Generally speaking, RiskIQ has been working at solving this problem for over a decade.
It's crazy.
The problem keeps getting bigger.
That's absolutely correct.
And are we ever going to get ahead of it, or is the reality we're always sort of just trying to catch up? It's just the way it is.
I mean, the depressing answer that I would have is that I think most businesses that are operating today that want to continue to remain profitable, absent regulation inside the industry, I think you're going to continue to see that catch up that's taking place. I think what's most exciting is that businesses that want to start anew, literally today, like they want to go register whatever state they're going to do their business in.
Right.
They want to start building out that digital presence, their digital footprint, their quote attack surface.
Yes.
There's enough services that exist today in the market that I do fundamentally believe that it could be done right. Does it mean that they're never gonna have problems with vulnerabilities, that someone won't be able to attack them? Of course not.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, as long as people are involved inside of a business, there is a vulnerability that exists.
Right.
But I truly believe in some of the technologies I'm seeing that it is possible to build a secure or fairly secure organization, and implement fairly secure practices that don't get in the way of allowing the business to grow.
Correct. Well, thank you for your time. This has been a great opportunity. We'll continue the dialogue, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we end at this point and look forward to the next get together.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us here at RiskIQ Radio. Brandon, tell us about your sort of contact information if people want to reach you.
Sure. So you can reach me at brandon.dixon@riskiq.com. So it's BRANDON Dixon DIXON at riskiq.com.
And this is Jack Russo. I'm the managing partner of Computer Law Group, Jack at computerlaw.com. And we actually have a phone number and answer the phone, 650-327-9800. We've been practicing in this area forever, and we've seen a lot of the stuff that happens if you don't have a great company like RiskIQ helping you with your security.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to RiskIQ Radio.